philosophy, questioning, enlightenment, deep conversation, spirituality. This is the spiritual download.
It sounds like when you mention something about like the nervous system, and you say that it's like in our body, how much is that related to like Kundalini energy, and what should people on the spiritual path know about Kundalini energy?
Oh God, there's a lot of relate. It relates quite a bit. Now, first of all, I think it's actually good. One of my first bits of advice for people on the spiritual path is don't go chasing Kundalini awakening. Don't chase it. Don't try to force it. I'm sorry to piss off everybody who's doing Kundalini practices, but it's safer to have it arrive as a nice byproduct, as a cherry on top. Whether it's the flow of prana or the flow of Kundalini, they're going to come when they're going to come because they're trying to come all the time. It's primarily our own resistance to life which is keeping them down. We're kind of like tubes, basically, maybe a collection of many different tubes, if you want to, visualize the Chinese meridians or the nadis of the Hindu system, whatever. We have a lot of pipes going, and because just like when you kink up a hose, you impede the flow of water. Well, that's what we're doing to ourselves when we identify as the little separate individual self. We're kinking our hose. And so the flow of the prana goes to a trickle. The flow of the Kundalini is all wrapped up way down. It's dormant, as if dormant, but it's a spring that really would like to pop up. And so as we're doing a meditation path, which is effectively healing us, which is reversing that tension, then nature takes care of the rest. Nature has it. The Kundalini is going to rise however it wants to, and the clearer we are, the clearer our plumbing is, the more easeful that event or series of events can be, even unto being barely noticeable at all. Some people shake and quake and have all sorts of stuff happen. That's actually a sign, not necessarily of spiritual attainment, but it's a sign of having our channels be still a little bit clogged and dirty. Just like if you try to put a lot of water or through a very clogged pipe, it might start to gyrate from the pressure. And so some people at all, you might not have a big crazy blowout bells and whistles experience, and that's just fine. It's also just fine if you have one like that. We all have different paths. There's a different plan or sequence for each and every one of us. So that's the that sacred divine energy it's there right now. It would like to rise. Prana would like to flow, and all we're really doing is just getting ourselves out of the way.
So is probably like breath work and practicing, inhale, like long inhale, long exhale. Is that a good beginning practice for most people?
I think that's great. I think it's, and then ultimately, I think it's quite good when it's paired with some kind of effortless meditation practice. That itself, for some, can be, their doorway to samadhi. There's so many different types of breath work that I would probably want to, at least treat some of them differently than others, because some are designed, some could be really intense for some people, and so a little bit of caution with some of the maybe the extreme Kundalini related breath practices. There might you go in with your eyes open, a little bit of wisdom, and maybe with somebody who's a fairly seasoned facilitator or practitioner, with that system. But yeah, that's wonderful. Pranayamas are wonderful practices.
Based on our Western culture, like, and maybe we're kind of a mind-heavy culture. Where's a lot of that that spiritual energy being stuck? Is it more like in our stomachs or our throats or something?
You mean like the Kundalini when you say spiritual energy?
Yeah, Kundalini or prana. I don't really know the difference. So.
Well, with Kundalini, it's pretty much mostly stuck up down in the lower floors. So classically, it's treated as slumbering in the root chakra. That's the classical treatment of where Kundalini is going. I meet people who it's apparent that they're getting some rise happening, but it might be it might just be going up into the sort of second chakra area, or it might even be getting up into the navel. People are different, but typically, yeah, it's stuck down in those lower floors. Now, if we're talking about prana, if we're talking about energy, the energy of life in general, then yeah, there's a lot of variability. We all have our tensions sort of in different areas of life, so, and that certainly does manifest in different sorts of physical ailments or a sense of tension in different parts of our bodies. I've seen some people, it looks like there's a brick in their head, and there's just, whoa, there's, something, that's where they're storing their stress. We all store it for whatever reason, and it's quite complicated, I suppose. We all store it in different spaces. My gut for me, that was a place. There was, the way I was raised, in some ways unintentionally, was that I ought not to get angry, and so I really did my best to stuff anger most of my life, because I wanted to be cool, calm, and collected, and not hurt other people, not sort of go off on other people. And so that manifested, physically in different places.
Yeah, with so I guess what are some ways that people could start, kind of like what are the basic tenets of your meditation practice? Like what could like the first two things that most people could just start using right away, that would be maybe unique from other meditation practices?
Well, I would give sort of a very similar practice out in this sort of setting, because I take a longer time to teach the ascension practice. I teach it in the way that I was taught to teach it, basically. But that said, an effortless practice, a very simple effortless practice, can simply be using any object of attention, using any meditative vehicle. That we could use a Sanskrit mantra. We could use Hebrew letters. I think that there's a class of different thoughts, we might say, that instead of having the tendency of moving the mind outward, that they have this natural tendency of moving the mind inward, down to the source, back to the source of consciousness. So, for instance, say, and I do, beyond what I'm going to say now, I do recommend people sit with a teacher or practitioner and take a little bit, take a longer time to kind of sink into this sort of practice, simply because it's the simplicity of it. It's almost as if people have difficulty with simplicity, and there's this need to kind of almost like marinate in a simple meditation practice over a number of sessions, so that these sort of often unconscious tendencies of making things more difficult can be addressed and ironed out and kind of seen and let go. So there's my caveat right there. But that said, you could take the mantra Om. You could take the mantra Shreem, or any of the so-called Sanskrit bija mantras, seed mantras. And you could, or Kleem, that's a beautiful mantra. These of course all have different flavors, and I think they have different effects. But in general, any of these for any person could be a wonderful meditative vehicle. So say we'll use Kleem, for instance, the sound Kleem. I think it's most helpful to think it in a very neutral kind of way, as simply as one would think waste paper basket. There's really no charge there. There's no need to have this great big devotional feeling, in one's chest. There's no need to have, to put oomph into your mantra. There's no need to force other thoughts away, and there's not even any need to force oneself to concentrate deeply on the mantra. So the best way to use it is to take it like a stone in your mind and drop it, just like dropping a stone into a pool. So we think the mantra Kleem. I'm closing my eyes because it's so natural for me to do that. But we think the mantra Kleem, and then we simply let whatever wants to happen. So if you have thoughts come up, wonderful. If you find your mind paying attention to feelings in the body, which is also a thought, or a noise outside, or a bunch of thoughts, wonderful. When you notice that you're thinking some other thought, when you notice that you're off in a different zip code, then you very, very gently come back to that mantra. You very gently come back to Kleem, or whatever it happens to be. And that it's that simple. And which is why I started with that caveat, is as having done a practice like this for 18 years now, I've kind of been through all the ways that one can make things more difficult than they need to be. Often we're unconscious of that conditioning is very deep for most of us, especially in the so-called Western world. That's very deep. But I think most cultures in the world, we have the same problem. But it's that simple. And so you take that meditative vehicle, just simply think it effortlessly. If you go into perfect silence, that's wonderful. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to watch your experience. You don't have to be hyper vigilant about when the next thought's coming up. That's something that I did when I first learned, is I would try to, catch it real quick. I was going to be the best meditator, just like I was going to be the best student. No, that's not that helpful, actually. So we think Kleem. We let whatever happens happen. It's like the waves at the beach. Slowly the waves roll in. Slowly they fall. Slowly they withdraw again. No one makes them come. No one makes them fall. No one makes them withdraw. It just happens. We don't need to try. We don't need to strain. We don't need to concentrate. It's like gentle little clouds floating by on a summer's day. Now the sun shines. Now a little cloud covers the sun. Now we think our mantra. Now we experience thought. It's back and forth. Very gently, very easily. And the only rule in this practice is that when we notice we're no longer thinking the mantra and we're thinking a completely different thought altogether, then we just gently come back to that mantra. just that simple.
Yeah, can you talk about the importance of gentleness in meditation?
Yeah, because when you try to make an enemy of your mind, when you have this oppositional sort of relationship with thoughts, it has this tendency of just adding to the noise, adding to the problem. And so when we're gentle with the practice, that eases off. And more so, there's kind of already a natural tendency for us to meditate. You know, there is a natural tendency of the mind to quieten. I don't know if that's even a word. There's a natural tendency for the mind to move back toward its source. And so when we give it, we could think of the mind as like a monkey, you know, jumping from branch to branch, and we think, oh yes, its natural tendency is to be a very naughty monkey indeed, and think all these thoughts. Well, that's partially true, but it's also true that if you give that monkey a banana, you know, if you give it something another thing that it likes, it's going to follow that. And so that's where the mantras come in, is the mantras serve as ideal bananas to the mind. And they may not necessarily always feel at first blush pleasurable on the surface of the mind, but we can think of our mind as this sort of, you know, as a collection of layers. And so these are the types of bananas, you know, these mantras, that they just kind of become more and more pleasurable the deeper we go, the deeper the strata, until they pop into the deepest strata. And so being gentle is simply a wonderful way of facilitating that process without throwing too many wrenches in the works. You know, you don't want to give a monkey a banana and hit it with a stick at the same time. It's kind of you know, counterproductive. Yeah.
We could also switch gears a little bit and talk about, because one other thing that you do professionally is astrology.
Yeah.
What type of astrology do you do?
Well, you know, I mainly what I do is I connect people with their life purpose. And I do that through astrology, or that's one of the tools that I use when I'm in session with a person. You could say that the type of astrology that I do, you could call it evolutionary astrology. You could call it archetypal astrology. That might even be better. But basically, I use astrology as a tool for, you know, kind of looking into the foundational songs of a person. As again, I've come back to this musical analogy. I feel people are kind of like, you know, there are all these individual beautiful songs around, and most of us, you know, we lose track of what our song is, or maybe we have a dim awareness of it. So that we're tuned in every now and then, we're kind of confused about it. And so that's really the highest purpose, I think, of that line of work, is to basically have a session with somebody and sing their songs back to them, or whatever songs are trying to make themselves present in that moment, or the ones that are, you know, supposed to be, you know, paid attention to at this time, in, you know, whatever time in the person's life it happens to be. And so that's the point of all that, is to, you know, connect people back with their purpose, with their dharma, with their mission. You know, another way I like to think of people is in a kind of a Taoist sort of way, and the Taoists often use the sort of grains of wood as an analogy, and so in the Tao Te Ching, one is admonished to go with the grain and don't go against the grain, because when we go against our grain, that's where we cause all of our problems and our suffering. Instead, you know, you're to sort of tune in and go with the path of least resistance, and that's exactly it. When we go with our purpose, that's the path of least resistance. When we allow the song that's trying to play through us to play, that's the path of least resistance. We're no longer, it's like also thinking of our life as and the living of it as a journey down a river, you know, and there are different ways we can go about that. Often we're trained to panic like hell and try to control the whole process by grabbing onto the sides of the river, and in doing that we get torn to pieces often. And so rather, what we want to do is to relax and let go and let ourselves float out into the middle of the river and let it steer us the way that it's trying to. And in that way, we reduce the friction and we reduce the suffering, and we speed our journey significantly. So that's where astrology is a nice little side, sort of a side tool to a meditation practice. Because when we're doing a meditation practice, what we're doing is we are, you could say, we're reconnecting with that deeper wisdom that knows where the river's trying to take us. And at the same time, all of those habits of self-protection, all of those habits that are, you know, mainly fear-based, all of those things start to, with a good meditation practice, start to weaken, start to fall away, start to fall off, often without us even noticing it. And so as those fall off, it's natural that instead of, you know, panicking like hell, you know, to life situations, we instead have this intuitive capacity to flow with the river.
So when someone forgets their song per se, what is it? Mostly society that teaches them to forget their song, or is it personal choices that they've made throughout their early life that they've forgotten their song?
Well, all of the above, but really, foundationally, it's predominantly our early childhood experiences. If you want to bring in other lives into this, we can do that too. But we could just keep it to one life, and it's those early childhood experiences. We could say that we made a choice, and you know, my experience of having really early memories is that indeed I was kind of making choices. It didn't feel like an adult choice. It's a very subtle choice. You know, I remember taking on my parents' tensions, for instance. I remember doing it because I wanted to help them out. Also in some way because I was afraid that if I didn't do it, I wouldn't, you know, everything would be out of control. So it was fear as well. I was trying to protect myself by sort of, in some ways, channeling their stresses through me, and the rest of my environment too. So that was a choice, but I didn't register it. It was, you know, very quickly forgotten, deeply unconscious, and we hold on to these unconscious choices of protection throughout our lives, unless we do something that takes us to a deeper level of consciousness than the level at which those choices were made. And so, yeah, what if we could say that, you know, when we're infants, for instance, survival and worth are very tied tightly together, and the things that kind of the binds that happen at that point are often maybe the most pernicious and the weeds to sort of uproot, because we want to be accepted by our caregivers. So we often end up, hiding away all the things that we think are unacceptable or unworthy about ourselves. And that's an act of control. And that's the creation of the Jungian shadow right there, is we learn how to put on a certain face in public, and we learn how to change faces for different people. We learn how to wear all these masks, and we learn how to keep some masks completely stowed away, because if we were to let them out, all hell would break loose and we wouldn't be loved, and maybe we'll die. I think it really gets down to that level in the limbic system, in the reptile brain, which is what we're often dealing with here. This is not a rational language. This is the language of the unconscious. So, hence psychotherapy. But, or meditation. I'm not one of these people who devalues therapy, or especially in the hands of a good practitioner. At the same time, I understand that it's a good meditation practice is going to take you very quickly into territory that it might take many, many years for say like a talk therapy to kind of even get to.
So is the main idea of astrology that like the solar system is connected with your life? So it's not just your little life here, going to work and raising kids and going to school, but like literally how the planets are in orbit. I guess this kind of, I don't really know too much about astrology. So.
No. Like logically, even to myself, logically, from most angles, astrology seems quite dubious. But the kind of the way I would describe it and describe how it's working, and I think really the only way that it works is built based on an understanding that the entire cosmos is already inside you. Is that your moment of birth, one's birth chart is a snapshot of you being born into the world and being yourself a reflection of the whole universe. That Mars, whether we're talking about the planets Mars or Neptune or Mercury or Venus or Jupiter, Saturn, every other one, or we're talking about the signs that they happen to be sitting inside, with Capricorn or Sagittarius or Scorpio or Pisces or Aries or whatever, that these are all things that are inside us already. That astrology is kind of a way, sort of an archetypal language. That these, this all seems quite arbitrary too. Who decides how a planet, which planet is somehow representative of which archetype or bundle of archetypes, or how do we decide which sign is somehow representative of which archetype or bundle of archetypes? And those are good questions. Might not necessarily get into them right here, but suffice it to say, the idea is that the cosmos is inside, that you are a channel. Basically, each and every one of us is a particular channel, is a particular, you might say, facet of the cosmos. And astrology is a means of looking at, well, which facet are you? Which notions are you going to pick up on readily? How are you going to be motivated? What are you seeking and how are you seeking it? What songs are playing through you? To bring it back to the musical bit. And that's astrology in a very small nutshell right there.
And what if you study more and more of this stuff, like I've heard about Jyotish, is it possible to, like, the next thing I want to talk about is politics. Like, is it possible to, like, have an idea of where we're headed politically, in the United States or in China or something, the more you study things like Jyotish and astrology?
Yeah, well, Jyotish is East Indian astrology or Vedic astrology. It has some similarities with Western, but it's different. They use a different. They're about 23.4 degrees different from each other. That's why if somebody has, say, a Scorpio sun sign in Western astrology, if it's before 23.4 degrees Scorpio, you're probably going to have a Libran sun in Jyotish astrology. They use the sidereal zodiac, and Western uses the tropical zodiac. So for what it's worth, there's a little background information. But my answer to the question would be yes. But with both systems, and it's very interesting how it kind of works out that way. And it seems to be beyond confirmation bias, at least in my estimation. For instance, with the United States right now, there's a very big aspect that we're sort of rolling into, which for the U.S. and countries have their own birth charts. The birth chart I use for the U.S. was the one that was formed on July 4th, 1776. Of course, there's a little bit of, people say, well, should we use that one, or should we use when the Constitution was signed in 1789? And that's a conversation in astrology. But I typically use July 4th, 1776 as my birth date for the U.S. And so according to that birth date, we're experiencing what individual people will never experience unless they're Methuselah or Enoch, is we're experiencing the Pluto, what's called the Pluto return of the United States. It's when the U.S. was formed, Pluto was at a certain point, and it's taken this many years to go around the sun exactly to return to the point that it was, and it returns to exact degree in the year 2022, and yet at the same time it has sort of a ramping up period and a cooling down period of several years before and after 2022. So Pluto return symbolically is basically, you might say it's a deep auditing process, specifically of all the skeletons in the closet. So we might say there were certain imperfections at the founding of this country, which were not finished off in the 1860s, i.e. slavery, i.e. the genocide of the Native Americans, i.e. the treatment of women, the treatment of the poor, whatever, any kind of skeleton that was, any kind of bad bit in the foundation or weak bit in the foundation. Of course, people disagree on what's weak or not, but, is in a Pluto return brought back to be reckoned with, because Pluto is Hades. Hades is the underworld. Hades is the lord of the unconscious realms, of the dead, of that which is below everything, the murky shadow, the Jungian shadow. So now, whether we're ready or not, and everybody's going to experience this in a different way. It's a reckoning. It's a coming to see all the stuff that was under the surface. Much of it ugly, some of it may be beautiful. We often may collectively repress love and joy as much as and kindness as much as we repress all the other skeletons, like the urge to commit genocide. I think most people don't have that urge. Their urge is to protect themselves, but it ends up getting so twisted, of course, that atrocities, come out of that. So that's one significant thing. We've been going through other Pluto actions, a conjunction of Pluto and Saturn, which has some very similar energies over the past year and a half, an auditing process. It's happened in the sign of Capricorn, which has everything to do with power structures. You see what I mean? And so Saturn is all about foundations, looking at how sound a structure is. Saturn and Pluto and Capricorn, there has coming together. There are myriad ways in which this has manifested. One way is, there's been an auditing of everything that is toxic, a clear seeing of things that are toxic about power structures. I mean, the Me Too movement, right there. That the symbolism of that is deeply connected with Saturn and Pluto moving through Capricorn. The Panama Papers, which is a little bit before, but part of the ramp up. Bill Cosby, which really in many ways helped kick off the Me Too movement. Hannibal Buress out of nowhere, at a comedy show. It just says and you know what? Bill Cosby's a rapist. All of a sudden that catches fire, Didn't for years before. People were saying that here and there. No, nothing happening. America's dad, and all of a sudden, this and other cases. Whether truly or whether untrue. That the trend has been to deeply question what's happening. At the same time, it also manifests as it did in sort of the early 80s when the last time Saturn and Pluto say were together. And I'm sorry if I'm getting too detailed here, but it also often manifests as some sort of conservative, reactionary comeback. That the conservative reactionary forces dig in even deeper, which is what I suspect is also going to happen with the Pluto return. Is that when you poke a Komodo dragon, it's going to fucking bite you. That's the limbic system. Pluto stuff, Saturn stuff is dealing with the limbic system in many ways. And so there are sea monsters in the unconscious, and so they're gonna maybe rear their heads. It's not just going to be a bunch of Archie Bunkers sitting on a couch, but we might see some of that. We're already seeing it with authoritarian governments populating themselves all around the world, with people forming cults of personality around authoritarian leaders who they look to as their they're rather toxic father figures. Where you have people where logic and rationality are not going to be the thing that moves somebody, because what is being brought up is the deeply irrational structures of the reptile brain. And really the only way to sort of help those along ultimately will be through love, through fearlessness, through courage, but through love. Something deeper. So yeah, that's.
Go ahead.
So yeah, that's a little bit of kind of a short preview of some of the stuff that a lot of astrologers, myself included, are talking about as far as world events.
Yeah, that's super interesting. That makes me think about Martin Luther King Jr. said, like the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, and just more higher well-being around the world. Do you see like the long-term trajectory, with maybe with COVID-19, there's more free times to dive into spirituality, and then, governments start coming together. Do you see that there's kind of this long-term trajectory towards more well-being, despite there being climate change and things like this for human beings?
I'm not entirely sure on that, and it really depends on how we define those words. I personally, this period of time right now, in fact, really my whole life, but now it's coming to a head. Now the things that were under the surface are starting to be felt by everybody. I call this the end of Atlantis redo test, basically. And some people might not be familiar with Atlantis as a concept, but for me it's a very real thing, and for me it was a historical epoch, a high civilization which probably ended due to a certain degree of hubris in some way, or certain attempts to dominate nature from the egoic separate self, and then reaping the unfortunate benefits of that. And so I see our times now to be something quite like that. We're facing a precipice, and a lot of the precipice we've gotten ourselves here in many ways by the way we hold ourselves, by ignoring our deeper self, by moving away from the love and the joy that is to be had by all, that's endemic, and struggling along as kind of scared tiny separate beings that we don't have to be. And so that has kind of pushed us to where we are. And so we're kind of coming to something of a reckoning. And I think that, my own personal conclusion is that at this point, there's a certain amount of suffering that we're not quite going to be able to steer away from. That's already sort of, that'll be very difficult to steer away from. I don't think, there's an iceberg that we're going to hit. Now we don't have to hit the whole continent, so we still have time to steer away from these other things, I believe. But we're facing some significant challenges. At the same time, I also view this, someone could accuse me of magical thinking here, but I view the world as kind of like a waking dream, and that the point of being here is to make it quite lucid, is to, step out of Plato's cave, step out of the matrix, and, find that part of ourselves that can't die, that part of ourselves that's changeless, timeless, and eternal. And in finding that part of ourselves, no matter what's going on the outside, there's a freedom there. There's a freedom with a capital F. And I think that's quite useful when we're living in such, quote, interesting times, is having that space, that peace that passes all understanding. And I think, if you like watching disaster movies like I do, I've always have, you watch these movies, or you read histories of people who've been in like Holocaust histories, or histories of people who've been in terrible situations. The most inspiring thing is the people who find love, who renounce hate, who renounce fear. They find this rock hard layer inside themselves, which nobody can take away from them. Now, that ultimately, I think we should be steered towards that place starting in kindergarten, slowly, certainly by the time we reach 13, but we're not. And so sometimes we have these situations which make maybe a little bit fertile ground for going in and finding that space, that uncorruptible space.
So it almost feels like meditation and spirituality in some levels like a survival mechanism too for our soul or our consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. If I'm training a crop of modern era spiritual warriors, that's gonna be for breakfast, lunch, and dinner right there. And the pre-dawn workout is meditate your asses off, is get to it, because you never know when you're going to die, and you want to be, and it's preparation. You want to be able to be the person who, when the shit really hits the fan, no matter what feelings are flowing through the body, and they might be, a lot and intense, if you have a space in you that's bigger than the moment, if you have a space in you that's bigger than the feelings, if you know that space, you become a wonderful servant and a beacon for everybody around you, and you become infectious in a good way. That's a joyful way to approach these times. Is, are you going to go towards freedom, or are you going to just kind of fuck around and do all the same old bullshit that one's done one's whole life? I mean, of course, the way I frame it makes it a pretty easy choice, but that's what it is. That's how it is. We can move towards that unconditioned space of consciousness, or we can just keep the record going in the same sort of pattern.
Yeah, it seems like courage and strength are very important virtues, not just in life, but in spirituality too.
Yeah. Oh, they obviously come in handy. Of course, I used to read these books which would, kind of make these lists of different virtues and qualities, and I would go through and be like, oh my God, I don't have any of these in enough quantity, and I'd come to honesty and be like, oh, at least I got that, but yeah, I think I had more than I thought I did. But courage, you know, we all, there is a detox process for so many of us. There is a facing of fears. There's a feeling of things that we don't want to feel, which, for us takes quite a bit of courage often. So it's gets us through the lean times. Commitment, just having commitment, just saying, I'm just going to do it. I might not count myself as particularly smart. I might not think I'm a spiritual Mozart. I might not rate myself highly in so many ways. But if one commits, if one simply gets up, gets back on the horse, and keeps going, just that right there is a beautiful quality.
Well, if someone wants to contact you, what are some of the resources that you offer for people to contact you?
Oh, well, I mean, for contact is just shoot me a message through one of my websites. You can probably find me on Facebook too. It's a lot easier to email me because it's much more difficult for me to lose an email than it is for me to lose track of a Facebook message in a sea of them. So go to either of my websites and get in touch through the contact form, and we'll be off to the races. And from there, I mean, I do both in-person and online meditation instruction. So I can, meet people either way. I used to only do in-person instruction, but over the last 18 months, I've sort of been experimenting with different people and found that it's fairly effective, and in some cases it may be even more effective depending on the person. So there's that. And then of course, you could, if you're interested in having a sort of a intuitive astrological reading, I might change their name to life purpose readings, who knows. There's always that option. And I tend to offer sliding scale fees in all of my work because I like doing the work. I like helping people. And so I don't really ever want to turn away somebody just for a lack of enough dimes to rub together. So I'm pretty flexible there.
Well, very good. Yeah. Is there any last comments that you'd like to make? Something that we haven't talked about that you were thinking would be a good topic, or?
Oh, no, I think I'm pretty blank right now. I think you squeezed what was in the moment to juice. So
it seemed like we brought like 8 hours of content into like an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah. Well, once you start getting into Atlantis and disaster movies and all of that sort of stuff, yeah, we're going some interesting places.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I know it's later there in Portugal, so I hope you have a good rest of your evening there, Ishtar.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you very much.